We were hunter-gatherers for several million years. Then we moved into the agricultural age, where we stayed for several thousand years. Then we moved into the industrial age, where we've been for a couple of centuries. We moved, number 4, into the information age, where we've been for a couple of decades, and just emerging now is what is called the augmentation age, where cognitive augmentation is occurring for the first time in human history. And we're moving from passive tools. This is an old stone cutter used by Stone Age Neanderthals to carve up animals, to things that are actually going to be working to generate independent ideas alongside of you. This has never happened before. And Nick Darvo-Garneau's been at the middle of this, if you recall, for most of his career. So, Nick, I'm going to turn this over to you. And the thing that I always take away is that you, in the middle of this, are astonished at the pace of change. So, Nick, I'll give the floor over to you. Away you go.
Well, thanks, David. Hi, everybody. My name is Nicholas Darvo-Garneau, and I used to be the chief evangelist at Google. And as David mentioned, I've been in the middle of this extraordinary AI wave over the last few years. So welcome to the AI Tsunami podcast. We're going to introduce a fantastic speaker today. We're really fortunate to have Jas Jaaj from Deloitte, who is going to really wow us in terms of his knowledge of AI and the work that Deloitte has done. So in terms of brief introduction, also Jas is a managing partner of AI data at Deloitte. And, very few people have a 20-year career in AI and data. But Jas, you've been doing this for a long time. And I'll leave the floor to you so that you can start by sharing with the audience some fantastic work that Deloitte has done in terms of surveying executives from all over the world on what's happening in generative AI. Jas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nick, and pleasure to be here with you and David. I will echo what you said. It is a fascinating period that we're in right now. And when you look at this paradigm shift that we're experiencing with the way in which AI is affecting so many different dimensions of society and industry, that it is really something to take notice of. And from our view, be proactive in terms of things you can do to be able to harness this power. So what we essentially have done in the last little while is, through an observation that when you look at business leaders, when you look at technology leaders, government leaders, we do feel that there's a tremendous amount of pressure that everyone is under to really, first of all, understand what the impact of AI will be in this new era, and how do you harness the capabilities to be able to really effectively apply it in your respective orbits. So coming from these discussions, there was a clear need for there to be objective and timely information so that leaders can absorb it and then be able to make decisions in the respective areas that they're focused to actually use this power for good and help their organizations, help their constituents, help their employees really get the best out of it while mitigating the risks that also come with this wave of AI that we're in. So we did a survey towards the end of last year. We spoke with about 2,800 organizations across 16 countries. And what I thought we can do is start by me sharing with you 5 key findings, and then we can have a dialogue about them. So to start with, the first observation that we had was the excitement around this wave of generative AI is high, but the efforts that organizations are focused on right now, primarily around efficiency and productivity and cost reduction initiatives versus innovation and growth focused initiatives. So there is a prevalent view, about 79% of respondents indicated that over the next 3 years, AI is going to drive substantive organizational transformation. And in fact, a third indicated that this will happen within the year. So in spite of that, when you look at the focus of where organizations are investing right now, it's at about 70% of them are looking at optimizing the cost base and looking at productivity and efficiency areas, so to speak. Okay, so that's number one. The second one is that there's broad uncertainty when it comes to how you manage talent, how you deal with governance implications and the risk implications when it comes to generative AI and broadly AI as such, where the data is indicating that only 22% of leaders believe that their organizations are well prepared to address the talent related issues that are going to be coming with generative AI. And a vast majority of leaders, 72%, expect that generative AI will drive changes in their talent strategy within the next 2 years. With all of this, many organizations, interestingly enough, are not focused on the education and reskilling aspects that are needed in this era. It was only 47% of organizations felt that they are, sufficiently focused in terms of helping their employees make this transition into the new era that we're in. And only about a quarter of leaders believe that they are well prepared when it comes to this other part of governance and risk mitigation that needs to happen when they're dealing with AI technologies, right? So that's number two. The third one, focusing more on the societal aspect of things. So leaders worry that generative AI is going to create, I'd say, a broader economic inequality when it comes to how it's going to affect different parts of society, where there's a view that it will centralize global economic power. And 52% of respondents said this, and essentially increase the economic inequality that exists. So that's a concern. And also to address this, majority of the respondents also felt that there's a strong need for regulation. 78% of the respondents felt that, and collaboration, not only locally, but internationally, so that we get this right and mitigate these risks. So broadly, when it comes to society that we're looking. So number 4 is organizations that have self-reported a high expertise when it comes to generative AI tend to feel more positive about it, but they also feel more pressured and threatened and feel a need to act now. And interestingly enough, it's the organizations that did not report a high level of expertise when it comes to Gen AI had lesser motivation to act and a higher fear of some of the view that you're hearing out in terms of the existential risks that AI can bring broadly to humanity as such, right? So there is a clear view that being able to create a distinction between the big existential risks that we deal with when it comes to AI versus the actual application in its current context in the enterprise to be able to generate value, that distinction is not being made. So the more fluent and the more educated you're becoming, you're able to separate the signal from the noise in terms of capturing value where it exists, while still making sure that the bigger risks are addressed through the right mechanisms, if you will, right? So the last one, the fifth key observation, was that most organizations are primarily relying on what we're saying off-the-shelf generative AI solutions. So when you look at, accessing the publicly available large language model solutions, be it from OpenAI or Google, Anthropic, etc., versus taking that next leap to now look at creating more tailored private models that will be grounded within the enterprise data that organizations have to be able to use them in more targeted ways within their enterprise for front office or back office applications. Right? So this is something which we believe that there's a shift that will happen over the next 6, 12, 24 months, but that's the state of play right now as such. So with these, 5 key findings, there are lots of learnings, there are lots of insights in terms of where everyone's head is. And that's what we're hoping that leaders will reflect on. And some that are, let's say, taking more of a passive approach, can get some insights in terms of what is the general landscape when it comes to organizations that are focused on, in a measured way, making the right investments to move their organizations forward versus, stagnating. So I think there's some important takeaways here.
Hey, Jas, thank you so much. That's super helpful. Let's go through those one by one, and I'll choose number 4 first because it was very telling that the organizations, like the rich will get richer and the poor will get poorer, right? The organizations who are ahead feel more pressured to get even better, and the ones who are behind are the ones who are just, very fearful of this. And when I listened to you, it sounded like if I'm really behind in this strategy, then I'm kind of throwing obstacles in front of my company, like, oh, this AI could have negative consequences for society, therefore I won't, touch it, right? So how can an organization get away from that? And how can a leader who kind of up to now has been mostly kind of viewing AI as a negative and kind of put it to the side, how can you change the culture? How can you change your mindset to one where you're going to be on the front foot as opposed to the foot?
So what I would say is there are two key things. One is, as I'm indicated earlier as well, knowledge is power when it comes to the space that we're operating in. The more you learn, the more you understand it, the more you can separate, what the current state of play is with AI and how and where value can be captured, the more at ease you will be when it comes to, or less anxious you will be when it comes to applying it within the context where it can really create value by doing the diligence. Because it's not a situation here where literally it can unequivocally apply and create value in every single aspect of what is happening within an organization, so to speak, right? You have to be thoughtful in terms of developing, going back to first principles, developing a business case, developing a thesis in terms of how and where it will create value, conducting pilots or prototypes to validate those. And then only then you actually take that next leap to scale it and deploy it across the enterprise. And that comes with increasing your knowledge, understanding exactly how and where it will make an impact in the short term versus long term. And then secondly, and this applies to individuals at every level, and even, let's say, citizens broadly in society, you have to use it. You have to get your hands dirty with it to really appreciate it versus reading about it or listening to podcasts or, hearing about what the media is talking about, because that will sway you in all sorts of different ways based on the agenda or the biases that exist externally versus you yourself, rolling your sleeves up and actually starting to play with it if you have not yet. And then it's beholden on the leaders in enterprises to arm their employees with the tools so that they can actually do it in a frictionless manner. So that's also another important part of it in terms of how you bring that cultural shift.
No, couldn't agree with you more. So I have a specific suggestion for people, by the way. One, get the paid version of ChatGPT, get the latest version, right? Pay the $20 a month. Do the same thing with Gemini, right? Which is Google's version, or Anthropic or Cohere, right? So get the 2 or 3 top, large language models and start playing with them. And then what I also did, I took a class on Coursera, which costs, $30 a month, I think, from Vanderbilt University on generative AI, right? And how to, do much better prompting. And that class was so eye-opening on the power of what these models can do, much beyond what you hear every day on, writing a poem or writing a speech. The data analytics these models can do, like you can give this thing a huge spreadsheet of data and ask it to get insights for you and so forth. So I think, by the way, like, David and I sit, on a number of boards, and even at the board level, like board members should be using these tools, executives should. So step 1, right? Education. So let's assume that's done. Let's assume that the senior management of a company that, previously had been a little bit concerned about this and hadn't really gotten started is now, they've done the research, they've played with these tools, and they understand the power of these tools, and they're maybe a little bit less afraid or concerned about these tools. What's next? Like, how do you get started? What's the first thing that you should do just to get your feet wet, but after you've got the education part done?
Mm-hmm. So from a context of the enterprise, there are some key things that you do. Let's say once your basic understanding and fluency is in place, the goal here is to capture value, is to be more productive, is to be able to create differentiation at the end of the day by using this as a force within the organization. So having a systematic way by which you can look at different parts of your enterprise all the functions to be able to identify what type of use cases can actually generate the value is table stakes. And, many organizations are doing it. The challenge there is that when you go through a thoughtful exercise like this, you end up with a backlog of use cases that is not in the tens or 20s or 50s, it's in the thousands, right? So once you have that, then the next question becomes, how are you going to be able to come up with a way by which you prioritize and start to focus on the ones that are important? And by applying, there are different frameworks you can apply to this. The one that we typically use is looking at the desirability and the viability and the feasibility of the different use cases that are being identified. And then being very deliberate about not only going after the low-hanging fruit, because that's something which I've observed that many organizations knee-jerk will say, oh yeah, this seems like a very basic way to generate a report that I have been, spending X amount of hours doing, and now I'll be able to do it in minutes. And then you keep adding to that list, and then you end up with like this huge backlog. And then pretty much, let's say, most of your investment goes into these low-hanging fruit use cases. We feel that's important. Look at those. But take a portfolio-based approach where you have a mix of some of the quick wins, but then also go after some of the big game-changing plays where you will be able to transform different functions and different parts of your organization. Because as you're building these muscles and as you're building this capability within the enterprise, it takes time and it takes iterations before you will be able to optimize the quality of these larger plays, which can really make a massive difference in terms of your sustained competitive advantage that you will have in this market, where everyone right now is focused in terms of gaining that advantage and investing and moving fast. So there's a balanced approach to be taken when it comes to how you design the portfolio of investments you're going to make when it comes to AI. Then the other thing is the leaders within organizations have to make sure that you're making investments on the technology side to upgrade and evolve your architecture and your tooling so that you can actually make it available in a as frictionless manner to your employees so that you can actually start to build stuff. And then the last thing I'll say is, with all of this, you also have to be very thoughtful in terms of having the proper risk guardrails in place so that when you're using it, you're not exposing the organization to risks that in fact will have an opposite effect while you're trying to gain this advantage.
Right. For example, I read a study recently that 11% of the information employees put into ChatGPT, is confidential information. And a lot of executives don't understand that this information will now stay in ChatGPT forever unless you have your own kind of private instance of a large language model. So that, obviously, this needs to be addressed immediately. You don't want your quarterly earnings reports to be on ChatGPT, a week before the earnings call. Back to the first point that you made, in the survey, and thinking about this portfolio approach, you mentioned that 80% of executives were really focused on, just kind of productivity improvements, but that's certainly not going to be, a game changer. You're not going to win your industry. You can certainly, hopefully, lower costs, but let's assume, that this isn't very differentiated. Let's assume that everybody except, the real laggards in an industry will use these tools to increase productivity. So, if I'm getting started on this journey to generative AI, I clearly should have these productivity, projects. But how do I think about, in a portfolio approach, as you suggested, how do I think also about doing things that are customer facing or things that are really transformational so that it's not just, decreasing costs by 20 or 25 or 30%?
So yeah, like if you organize the different initiatives, you definitely have your productivity plays, you have your front office customer facing plays, and then you have those much bigger transformative plays that you can focus on. Now, one of the reasons why we feel many organizations are hesitating to go into the customer facing area of application is there is some hesitation because of the impending regulation that will be kicking in to really understand what will be the implications for the organization and to not take a misstep and then be dealing with penalties and fines, which are also significant when you look at Bill C-27 as an example of what they're indicating the fines can be for non-compliance. So our view there is that there's enough information out there in terms of the structure of what the regulation will look like, in terms of things that the government is releasing around guidelines, be it, the code of conduct, if you will, that came out towards the end of last year, to be able to create the controls and the construct within an enterprise to self-regulate yourself while the official regulation is not enforced and in place, to be able to build that confidence so that you can innovate and start to put these solutions out. And there's a tendency at times to overcomplicate things as well, because if you look at the approach that Canada is taking when it comes to regulation, our regulation is anchored more on a risk-based approach, where we have identified high impact, medium impact, low impact scenarios. And then the regulation will be tailored based on the scenario that you're dealing with. Other jurisdictions have taken different approaches. As an example, the European Union, who I would say relatively furthest ahead, they have a very rights-based, a human's rights-based approach. The US is looking at it from a sectoral approach. China is looking at it as more of a centralized authority that is, literally approving and releasing these models in a very systematic and scheduled way. So everyone's taking a different approach. So first of all, realize what are the rules within your jurisdiction that you need to be mindful of, and educate yourself on that. There will be many, many customer-facing use cases where you will be able to hyper-personalize your products, offerings, and solutions, which will not be in the high risk or high impact bucket, right? So even though I will say from a regulation perspective, they have not clearly prescribed what is it that will fall specifically in the high impact, medium, and low. But if you are, let's say, offering products that you've offered on your website and offering services on your website already, and now you start to offer it in a more personalized manner to target the individual needs and wants of a user, you can anticipate what the risk profile of that will be, to not let yourself freeze and not do something about it and gain that advantage through a personalized customer experience, right? So I think that's a very important piece of it, which is understand the sandbox that you're in, understand what type of regulation you will be affected by, and then start to ideate and build solutions to be able to target your customers through these personalized experiences. And it's a matter of again, through prioritizing, where do you have access to data? Because at the end of the day, as we know, data is the fuel that's going to be able to help you create these targeted offerings. Be very mindful in terms of where there is data gravity, as we say, or where do you have access to data that you can actually use to create these differentiating solutions and then start to roll them out.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree with you more again, which is you're basically saying that, the organizations that are behind and just kind of starting on basic productivity are a little bit frozen by fear of reprisal, whether it's bad PR, whether it's the government. And I think what you're suggesting, which I completely agree with, it's a use case by use case. Don't think about AI in general. Think about the application of AI for a specific thing, and then analyze that specific thing. And I think what you're also suggesting, and I think it's a really, really good advice, which is, have a portfolio approach, start with, the easy ones, have some things that are more transformational, but start with things that are low risk in terms of, governmental risk or, risks of, things going wrong. So it may be transformational, but it's, for example, if you're, financial institution, maybe you don't want to start with the algorithm to give out loans, right? Because if that is off and it, for whatever reason has bias inside of it, that could create significant risk. But other things that are customer facing in terms of personalizing offers or so on and so forth could be less risky. So it's pretty, issue number one in terms of transformational AI is people frozen by, real or perceived risk. Issue number two, which is, came out in your survey as well, which is, if I'm a senior executive and I've been convinced that I want to do this, I understand the risk and I'm okay with it. And I've got some use cases that I've selected that are, risk appropriate. Now I have a talent problem. right? So most executives will say, I mean, only 22% say they have the right talent. So, if you're a senior executive and you've got 3 or 4 transformational ideas in addition to, 15 or 20 productivity ideas, but you don't have the talent around this issue.
So when it comes to this very important piece around what is the supply side looking like in terms of availability of talent that can actually help you build this, you will obviously go through the motions and, reskill and educate and help your people upskill into be able to do these things over time. But in the interim, what we feel is important is that you have to be able to build partnerships. You have to be very active in your ecosystem to be able to say, be realistic about what type of capability you have, be thoughtful about what capability exists around the ecosystem, and then be very deliberate in terms of deal making with the right players to be able to complement the skills that you have with those other providers to be able to accelerate your pathway towards getting those initiatives launched. This can be cloud service providers, it can be consulting organizations, it can be startups, it can be scale-ups, it can be data providers. So that's where, again, organizations really have to lift their head up and look at the ecosystems, understand it, and then build and curate those strategic partnerships to be able to address that gap of capability or skills that, that might exist in their organization.
And Jas, they're very significant. I took a look at at John Deere, has 33 different partnerships, joint ventures, ownership positions, 33 of them.
Wow.
And go through other companies like Bosch, who are advanced in all of these things. They have well over 2 or 3 dozen relationships with other vendors, other startups, other consultants, and it is huge. So it's not just sort of pick one. I think you're really looking at the leaders in this field have got a couple of dozen, if not 3 dozen different activities going on at the same time, trying to keep at the front of the pack.
You nailed it, David. And also in some cases, be open-minded to look at unconventional partnerships that you in the past have not even, looked at, right? So this can be a startup that has a very unique idea. This can be academia where there's some, awesome research happening that you would want to get some type of a early insight from, right? So I think keeping an open mind in terms of the types of relationships is going to be important as well.
Yeah, and it kind of just ties to the 5th point of the survey, which is currently organizations are really leveraging things that are quote unquote off the shelf, right? They're not doing custom work. They're partnering with software providers or cloud providers or consultancies to leverage existing software that others can leverage. But to the point you're making, that sounds like it's okay for the next little while, right? I mean, if all you did as a senior executive was, train your staff so they can use these tools, you create the right guardrails, you, start working on productivity improvement things, and then you find the right software that already exists in your industry and you leverage, what's really relevant. And that's a long, I mean, that's a 2 or 3 year plan that will take you a whole new level. So, would you agree that it's completely okay for the next little while to just use what already exists and not invent anything new, but then eventually think about that. But for now, just leveraging what's out there, things that already work for others, right, where the risk is low, that could be a very, adequate solution for a lot of companies.
And you can find that on ChatGPT, as Nick and I did in one instance. We just asked them who has gone into this industry and found some exciting things to do. And bang, we got, I think, 15 of them, Nick, right there. It was right on top of us. So being a fast follower, I think, is a very prudent way to go. At least gets you started in the game.
Indeed. I think depending on your maturity and which part of the industry landscape you sit in, you have to kind of come up with your own strategy to align with that. I will say in terms of what you already have, and looking at the existing motions within an enterprise, there are 2 other important things that I would highlight. One is this growing awareness, and many organizations are now it's becoming clearer that your data is going to be one of your biggest differentiators. And there's a spectrum, if you will, in terms of how organizations have managed their data and how accessible it is. Do they even know what data they actually have sitting in different parts of their organization? Typically, data governance programs, which are designed to do this, let's say, are not the most invested in. in many large organizations, right? So things that you can do right away is to really double down there to get a handle in terms of where the data sits, what is the real quality of your data, what type of data you can even use because of existing contractual commitments that might be tied with those data sets, to then have a clear view that as your capability grows and you start going into the zone of creating private and fine-tuned large language models, that you can accelerate your execution by having that handle on the data sets that you have as an enterprise. And then secondly, in terms of how you execute, it matters, right? There are operating models that you can develop that will make it either very difficult for you to get things done, or it can reduce the friction within the organizations and allow you to tap into that scarce talent and then get the most out of it. So what we are observing is that there are these strategic hubs that are being built as a part of an operating model of an enterprise that operates in a hub and spoke manner to be able to concentrate your expertise with the partnerships that we were referring to earlier as a part of the strategic hub, and then feed different parts of the organizations, which are the spokes, if you will, to be able to start to make progress in these initiatives. So those two things are also very important in terms of things that organizations should be thinking about today to be able to move forward and maximize their probability of success in this space.
Yeah, and that's super helpful. And then so looking in the last, half an hour, we've talked a lot about what to do, but you've worked with a lot of organizations on these strategies. What are things that senior executives should think about not to do? What are the pitfalls here? What are the things to avoid?
So not to do is what I would say is like, what comes to mind is big bang approaches, right? So when we talk about creating portfolios, it's for a reason, because you want to see a return on the investments. You want to be able to, especially in the environment that we're operating in right now, where there is pressure economically for organizations to be able to get more out of their dollar. There's a balance to be struck in terms of not going after only these big transformative game-changing plays and ignoring like the quick wins that you can accumulate, and then vice versa as well, as we spoke about. So that would be something which is important to factor into your strategy as you move forward. The other things that is a big, I would say, the no-no is spend the right amount of time and investment around your guardrails. From a security perspective, from a safety perspective, look at your cyber programs that many organizations have right now and reevaluate in terms of whether they are giving you the right coverage that you need, because the attack vector and the attack surface rather of an organization has widened because of adding this capability in your enterprise. So the solutions that you've had so far, your threat monitoring, detection, and response solutions, need to be looked at and upgraded to be able to deal with these additional threats that an organization inevitably is going to face as you're moving down this path and building these capabilities and rolling out solutions. And the third thing, what I would say is, don't put your head in the sand when it comes to what is happening in the ecosystem, what is happening in the regulatory landscape in terms of where things are going. It is very important to be watchful and sense how things are evolving so that you can do what I mentioned earlier in terms of creating the controls within your enterprise to self-regulate so that you can innovate with confidence. Keeping your head in the sand will only create that feeling of anxiety and not wanting to do things and freezing in your tracks and losing advantage, if you will, within that window while you're doing that, right? So that'll be the third thing what I would add.
No, I love those three things. And then, so on the last point, David and I talked to a lot of executives, and we're pretty forceful in our point of view on putting the head in the sand. So, these technologies are doubling in power every 3.5 or 4 months, and clearly that will continue. But if it did, well, that's a 30,000x improvement in 5 years, and we've never seen anything in the history of humanity move so quickly. So David and I have the opinion that this is vital. that companies who don't, at least become fast followers, take a significant risk and may even, become extinct? Are we exaggerating, or do you share the point of view that companies who don't at least keep up with their competitors in this space or take a significant risk?
No, I think you're right on. And to punctuate that point in terms of the type of shift that we are experiencing, if you look at the way in which the previous, disruptive technologies, how they've affected, let's say, enterprises and I'll say consumers in general. When you look at cloud, when you look at mobile, these are two big waves, including social, that really took the enterprise by storm within the last, let's say, 8 to 10 years. Right? These were all focused around consumption, in that they help you consume content in a more efficient and effective manner, and then hence we're able to create a lot of value. When you look at this new wave that we've entered, it is actually not only helping you consume things in a more effective manner, but it is also helping you create things in a hyper efficient manner. And to give you a data point around that, when you look at the cost of authoring content, historically, it's been about $400 per 1,000 words that typically people have charged to be able to write content, right? Be it, articles, blogs, etc. The cost of 1,000 words now has dropped down to 4 cents, right? So we're not talking about 100x. We're not talking about 1,000x. We're talking about a 10,000x shift that has happened literally within the last year. And that is profound in terms of implications. Now we're talking about text for the same because of the multimodality that, we know these models are getting into. This will apply to illustrations. It'll apply to images. It'll apply to all sorts of different content, right? Video as well, as we're starting to see now.
Analysis, right? Data crunching, creating new algorithms. I mean, coding, right? I mean,
Right.
for engineering, all this stuff is basically going to free.
There you go.
Right. One last question. Look, in many ways, Canada invented, a lot of the foundations of AI.
Mhm.
But according to a lot of surveys that I've seen, Canada's fallen significantly behind in the adoption of AI at the industry level. Why do you think that is, and how can Canada come back? Because I don't think the option of not coming back is on the table, knowing that Canada's productivity is already 31% behind the US. So what's happening in Canada, and how can Canada come back?
I'd say one of the biggest things is, as business leaders, we really need to reflect in terms of our appetite to handle risk. Because I think at the end of the day, culturally, systemically, our risk averseness in many cases is an impediment in terms of us investing the right amount and having that tolerance while, let's say, a disruptive technology is capturing the value, to not stop at at its tracks, but to go through with your initiatives to be able to really realize those outcomes that you would design as a part of your business case. I sense the level of investment that is taking place in Canada, and also the risk appetite that is, I'd say, markedly different when you look at some of the other developed nations in the world. So that I would say is, one of the most important things to get a handle on. Secondly, leaders across businesses really have to view the moment that we're in as, I'd say, as a refounding moment for enterprises, where you have to think about this as not a leader in a large multi-billion-dollar multinational, but think like a startup founder would, where you literally have to redefine so many orthodoxies around how things are happening in the organization to make inroads in this area and be relevant, frankly. Because when you look at these types of big paradigm shifts that we've seen in previous industry revolutionary technology plays, when you're passive and you don't invest at the right velocity and the right amount, you go extinct.
Yeah.
So this is where I would say one of the things which is anti-culture when it comes to Canada. We have to observe it and then mindfully move forward and deal with the ups and downs that will come in terms of some of the, let's say, initiatives that may not work out, but persist through them with a vision to be able to get your organization into that target state that you were anticipating.
Yeah. Well, Jas, that was incredible, super helpful, really practical advice. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. And thank you, Deloitte, for working with us on this. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Jas.
And I'd like to say that his characterization of this Gen AI as an extinction event ought to galvanize everybody into action, because I think if you don't get on this train now, then the only question you're going to have left as a CEO is, where do you want to bury me? That's where we are. This is an extinction event. You're gone if you don't get on this train. So you got us there, Jas. Thank you. Hope you take us forward.
Indeed. Thank you, folks. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jas. Grateful on behalf of the AI Tsunami community. Your talk summarizes Deloitte's research on Gen AI, and it's aptly named Now Decides Next. So the AI Tsunami, this annual webinar series, was created as a partnership between David Beatty and Nicholas Darvo-Garneau as an almost moral imperative for senior leadership to act on this generational opportunity. Beyond beating the drum, educating the corporate governance world, and providing access to the leaders and their insights, moving this space forward, including Jas, David and Nicholas are readily available for board briefings on digital transformation, including the transformational AI Tsunami, that are specifically customized for your particular organizational needs. In addition to that, David is available for chair advisory work, board evaluations, and other corporate governance education opportunities. I'm Quinn Lawson, David Beatty's marketing manager. Please reach out to the AI Tsunami channels to get in touch with anyone on these talks. Thanks again for participating. Invite other interested parties and reach out for customized solutions for your boardroom and digital transformation. David and Nicholas, is there any last comments?
Go get some stuff done.
Get started. Get going. Do something. Anything. Do it.